The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on an initiative called Engineering with Nature. It all started in 2010. And this is the EWN Podcast. EWN is developing and implementing nature-based solutions for water and infrastructure projects. It's bringing together a growing international community of scientists, engineers, and researchers from all kinds of disciplines that are committed to harnessing the power of nature to solve problems. The EWN Podcast tells their stories. Now here's your host, Sarah Thorne of Decision Partners.
Well, here we are. It's New Year, and we're kicking off a new season 7 of the Engineering with Nature podcast. I'm here with my favorite co-host, Jeff King, National Lead of the Engineering with Nature program. Happy New Year, Jeff.
Well, Happy New Year, Sarah. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have another year ahead of us. I think it's going to be a really good year for the Engineering with Nature program, and I know it's going to be a really good year for the Engineering with Nature podcast. We have quite an incredible lineup coming together for season 7. Before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about some of the highlights from season 6.
Well, Sarah, that sounds fantastic to me, and I think one of the biggest highlights has certainly been the number of listeners that are coming to our space. For those out there, thank you so much for listening. We kicked off season 6 at right around 34,000 downloads. And today we are at 47,000 downloads, and that number is growing. And I do believe that in season 7, we should be well over 50,000 downloads, which is amazing.
I think it is amazing. And it's so wonderful that we've got new listeners joining us every single show. And we're hearing from people who've just come into the podcast literally from around the world.
That is so true. And we really, really appreciate the interest and the support from our listeners. And that's right, Sarah. It is from around the world. And as you know, sometimes it gets hard for us to schedule podcasts just because of my travel schedule. And it's just amazing. Everywhere I go, the meetings I'm in or the conferences, workshops, people are listening to our podcast and they are truly involved. They're engaged. They love what we're doing. And it's just so incredibly exciting to get that kind of feedback.
I know, it truly is. And we look forward to hearing from people if they want to drop us a note or put something on the podcast page. We love to hear people's comments and people's suggestions. We get a lot of those too. Let's talk about season 6. Our theme was expanding the EWN lattice. And I really think we did a pretty good job of that, both in terms of topics and guests. So, Jeff, talk about some of the highlights for you.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, I appreciate the fact that we had such a diverse number of podcast guests. We really, I think, covered a wide array of topics that were certainly of interest to our listeners. And I think about, for example, talking with Annabella Bonata from the Impact Center on Climate Adaptation in episode 4. And she really did a great job of telling us about the wildfires that were in Canada that season, and the fact that they were the worst wildfires that had ever been recorded. And in fact, in July, I think she had indicated fires were increasing exponentially in terms of scope and intensity. And then what we had was the fires in Canada impacting many U.S. states and cities, and that this was really causing a real health and environmental concern, certainly thinking about increasing wildfires and then climate change associated with that and how that all interconnected.
Yeah, I'd say the summer of 2023 in North America, with the unprecedented wildfires we saw first in Canada, then in the US, the floods, the atmospheric rivers, the droughts, it was really sobering. And I think many people were personally touched by climate change, both here and around
right.
the world. And from what we're seeing right now, I think we're going to see more of the same in 2024.
Yes, Sarah, I do. I agree. It's not getting any better out there, unfortunately. And certainly, we're going to be positioned, I think, to be able to share information with our listeners about what the experts are encountering and what they're doing to try to mitigate some of those climate change disasters and other impacts that we continue to experience in our daily lives.
I think it's so rewarding for me personally to be able to talk to some of these leading scientists who are doing such important work on many, many topics related to climate change and the climate change imperative. So, one of the things I was really impressed with was the work that's being done incorporating nature-based solutions into coastal resilience initiatives. We had a really interesting conversation with Andrew McQueen. Andrew McQueen and I had with Joe Christo. Joe is the CEO of Stone Living Lab. That was way back in episode 2. And we talked with him about how nature-based solutions are being used in the Boston area to address significant sea level rise, which they are experiencing, flood risk management, and coastal resilience. It was just a really fascinating discussion.
Yeah, Sarah, and Andrew's doing a great job. He's leading one of our work units internal to the EWN program that's focused on incorporating nature-based solutions into urbanized environments. And his work with Joe there in the Boston area has been absolutely fantastic. We have learned so much in terms of wetland coastal marsh systems that are immediately adjacent to these very urbanized areas. And what's really interesting there are the benefits that can be derived from these coastal marsh systems, particularly in urbanized areas. There's this resilience component that is included where we see reduced erosion occurring as a result of having these marsh systems immediately adjacent to urbanized areas. But then also there's the social benefits that can also be derived from these kinds of systems too. And so they are really doing a wonderful job of being able to better understand how those systems perform, as well as what are those benefits that can be derived. So I really am excited to see and hear more about what they're doing. And, I thought that the show that you and Amanda did looking at dune stewards, the work that was done with dune stewards, Duncan Bryant, Nick Cohn, our ERDIC researchers, I thought that was excellent. And so really to think more about the importance of dunes, to stop and really take a minute to appreciate what they do for our coastal cities, for our coastal environments. They play such an important role when it comes to coastal resilience.
You're so right, Jeff. I mean, Amanda Treitinger is also one of my favorite co-hosts. Amanda is deputy lead of the Engineering with Nature program. And she came to me and she said, we have to do a show on dunes. She said, there's nothing that is as important as dunes. So yes, I loved doing episode 7 with Amanda and Duncan and Nick. They are just extremely passionate dune stewards. And I think what they did for the show, and certainly for me, is they just helped us understand the incredible value and the function of dunes, which, as they discussed, people often take for granted. We really need to understand the interconnectivity of all these different systems, and in this case, the role that dunes play.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah. And what's wonderful about working with Amanda and Nick and Duncan is that they have this level of excitement and enthusiasm all the time, 24/7. And that level of energy is contagious, and rightfully so. And so when we have an opportunity to talk with them, to really hear more about what they're doing, and for us to better understand the importance of this work, and to be able to really think about how we quantify benefits associated with nature-based solutions, I believe that a lot of the work that they're doing specific to dunes is going to be transferable to, say, other nature-based solutions, other nature-based features like wetlands or reefs, for example. And so we've got the modeling being done by Amanda, the modeling that's being done by Nick in terms of sediment transport. And then there's the flume work that Duncan has been leading. And I think that that can also help us from the standpoint of physical models and having the outcomes of those studies be transferred into, say, engineering standards and guidance. And I think that's where we're going to be going with this. I really do. I think that it'd be important also that we talk a little bit about what we learned when we had a chance to have Candace Piercy, who's a research environmental engineer at ERDIC, as well as Ram Mohan, who's a senior principal at Anchor QEA. And then we also had Monica Chaston on as well. She's a coastal engineer, project manager out of the Corps Philadelphia district. All of them came on our show as well.
They did. And we had just a fantastic conversation about the work that they've been doing on the new guidelines for how to approach thin layer placement projects.
That's right.
And, all of these people are bringing their passion and their work. And to my mind, it's all coming together. It's all interconnected, and they're all learning from each other.
Yes, they are, Sarah. And so, what was really special about rolling out the guidelines for how to approach thin layer placement projects is the fact that we had a chance to go back and talk about our colleague, Tim Welp.
Yes.
And as many of our listeners know, Tim, he was a renowned dredging expert. He passed away back in 2021, and we miss him every single day. But his passion lives on, and it lives on in these kinds of products like the guidelines for thin layer placement. And we had a chance to really talk about that. It was a very special time for all of us. And then what was really interesting, too, was to bring Monica on. Monica being a practitioner in the Philadelphia district. She was a really early pioneer of thin layer placement as a practice, how that could be used. And she actually had a chance to expand that for us and bring it to be something more commonplace within the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, sharing this work and sharing this really nascent idea that Tim had years ago, and he and Candace were kind of tossing around some ideas and see something come out of it that's now going to transform the practice, not just within the Corps, but globally. It's so rewarding. And I hope that their work and the work of all of the people that we have on our podcast, I hope it inspires the next generation to really dig in and learn these new techniques and advance the practices of engineering with nature and nature-based solutions.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah. And with the job that I have and certainly with these researchers in ERDIC, we have a chance to work with the next generation scientists and engineers all the time with our academic partners. And I remember, I was down at the University of Florida back in December, and there was a summit, if you will, that was focused on nature-based solutions. The students there were just so motivated, and their projects were so incredibly interesting. And they're all very, very passionate about what can be done to increase resilience, and also what can we do to avert risks associated with climate change. And so I think you're spot on. I think we're going to see the next generation take a lot of these tools, techniques, the practice that we've been developing, and they're going to take it to the next level. I truly believe that.
Oh, I know they are. And my experience with working with some of them is that they're just so damn smart. They're going to figure it out.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
So speaking about innovation and resilience, I absolutely loved the episode that we did on preserving St. Croix Island. That was episode 6. We had on Donald Soktoma from the Passamaquoddy tribe, Becky Cole-Will, who's with the National Park Service, and Amy Hunt from EA Engineering. It was such an interesting story to tell the history of this little tiny island, which, as Donald reminded us, went back thousands of years, and how all of these people are coming together with you, Jeff, to protect and preserve its amazing history.
I agree. I always learn so much, Sarah, anytime I have a chance to talk with Donald, and likewise, talking with Rebecca and Amy. Everybody has such amazing insight and perspective, and Donald is able to share as we heard, a history and understanding of this area that few people have a chance to really get to know and appreciate. And the Passamaquoddy Nation, having been here for thousands and thousands of years, certainly resonates for me. And the history of this island and what we see in the way of potential opportunity to increase the resilience of this very historic site. And I do think that, we're going to continue to see a lot of issues and challenges when it comes to systems like what we have in the Northeast. These very important historical sites are going to be impacted unless we have a chance to do something. And I do think that nature-based solutions are the right approach. Certainly when we think about the historical context and wanting to preserve sort of the natural setting so that future generations have a chance to embrace what is the importance of these areas and understand the history. It's important to see it in its natural context. And so that's where I think a project like St. Croix Island becomes really super important, is that we have a chance through these R&D efforts to test and look at a variety of different strategies. And then through those strategies, think about what can we deploy that makes the most sense. And then what will we be able to learn from those kinds of features that are placed in the environment? We are building upon those learnings and have another future effort that benefits from those past experiences.
Yeah, well, and as Donald said, he hoped that we'd be able to apply what we've learned here to many other similar islands along the coast. So
that's right.
We did promise that we'd have them back in this fall, so it'll be season 8. We want to hear about how the project is advancing and how nature-based solutions are being, incorporated into the solution. So we'll make sure that we have them back to talk about what's next for this really important island.
Yeah, I absolutely want to do that, Sarah. I think there's already been a lot of forward progress on this particular effort, this particular project. And I think certainly by the fall, we will have a very compelling part 2 of the story to share with our listeners. And, speaking of having guests back, I want to touch on the fact that we had Koch and Derek come back for episode 9. And after her year of being a designer in residence at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis, that was a real highlight for me.
Well, it was a real highlight. And as you recall, Koch had invited herself back. So we were really happy that they were able to make it. So just for our listeners, Koch Voracom, or Koch, as she goes, she's actually a rock star globally. We're so lucky she could make the time to come back on our show and talk to us about what she and Derek Hefferlin, who's the chair of the Landscape Architecture program, were able to do together in the year that they had. It was just so neat. So basically what they did was they explored her passion for climate adaptive designs with his passion for watershed scale solutions, and the synergistic results are just amazing. I think, to put it in perspective, when we first spoke in season 4, episode 10, which was in the fall of 2022, I think she and we all thought that she would design and build something as part of her residency. Well, she didn't.
Well, and that's where, it gets to be very interesting. And certainly for our listeners that may have missed that episode, I would encourage you to go back and listen to episode 9, because there's so many interesting, deep thoughts that Derek and Koch share and offer an explanation, certainly as to how things morphed a little bit during her tenure in that position. And she chose to explore experiences of a range of people living in and around St. Louis that were experiencing flooding and drought. And she actually was able, as a landscape architect, to pull in their experiences, their perspectives on impacts of climate change, around the Mississippi River. And she then talks about how she was changed personally and professionally by these experiences. And so with the video that she's preparing, I look forward to seeing that video. I look forward to hearing more about her conversations, her reflections on her journey, and how, as a landscape architect, she is leading change as a designer and as an architect.
I think, Jeff, we could both say we were really profoundly touched by that conversation with Koch and Derek. It was certainly provocative, and it made us think. So we then wrapped up. We went from that show to wrapping up season 6 with what I would say was really expanding the lattice. We had a renowned author, Florence Williams, join us to talk about the nature fix and her journey to discover the science between nature and well-being.
I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and so grateful to Florence for spending some time with us. And I think that was a great way to end that season with a bang. Absolutely. And she has such an interesting story, both from a personal standpoint as well as her professional journey to discover the science between what makes us happier and healthier and more creative, and that interconnection with nature. And then she, in the conversation goes on to talk about her reflections on the power of awe. And I thought that exchange that you had with Florence was so inspiring, and it really does help to put things in perspective. I think that too often we get caught up in the hustle and bustle, and we just go from one fire to the next every day, just putting those fires out. And how important it is for everybody to stop, take a minute, catch a breath, and be out in nature, preferably, to really get back to what makes us whole. And I, for one, want to be more mindful and present in nature in 2024.
I agree, Jeff. And, I heard someone talk about New Year's resolutions, which everybody breaks. And she spoke instead, I think she was Korean. She spoke instead about having New Year's wishes, which are aspirations, which I really like that idea. And
I do
so
too.
My New Year's wish is that I take time every day to find a little awe in every single day and reflect on what it means to my life. And I hope that my friends, my colleagues, my family, and our listeners will take the same time to do the same thing.
Excellent point, Sarah. Yes. And for our listeners that are very mindful of this as a New Year's wish, I want you to share those stories with us. I think that everybody could benefit from hearing about your experiences, and certainly the other listeners that we have in our space as part of this podcast would be very interested in hearing about your experiences. And we too, Sarah, I think you and I should be sharing some of what we're out there doing, and maybe people will hear that and be inspired.
We could do a whole show on my obsession with mushrooms and my newfound talent as an amateur mycologist.
Well, now, okay, all right. Well, we'll have to make some time for that one.
Just the producer stepping in here. We may need a medical disclaimer on that show. Just saying. Carry on.
They're not that kind of mushrooms, Dave. But anybody who's interested, I could share my mushroom photos. Yes, it's something that I really found connects me to nature.
Well,
so there.
And I'm sure our listeners have similar kinds of hobbies and experiences too. And we learn from each other. This is a space where we really do try to share information and to have it benefit the individual. So I think these are really interesting ideas, and we should be willing to share some of those experiences because others may want to try it too.
Exactly. We want to share your passion for nature. We'd love to hear about it. So listen, as we're talking about all this creativity and mindfulness, mushrooms aside, that comes from spending time in nature, let's talk a little bit about what's coming ahead for season 7. We have fantastic guests lined up. We've got some really, really cool topics that are coming together. Jeff, why don't you talk a little bit about our theme, continuing the EWN journey, and what it means for you?
These themes are always something that I really do try to spend a little bit of time thinking about and wanting to pull together ideas and thoughts that will sort of take us to another level. And on the surface, continuing the EWN journey seems pretty simplistic. We've done tremendous work, you and I, over the years, and Todd too, to be able to create the podcast and to be able to get information out to the public. And we've had many different themes along the way. And I feel like with the number of downloads that we've had, the amount of interest and enthusiasm now that's coming into this space, the diversity of individuals and guests that we've had, we're in a pretty good place. We really are. And so why not continue on this journey to be able to share with our audience, again, the wonderful topics that continue to come our way, the people that we are blessed to get to know on this journey, and really enlighten those individuals out there that are part of our large audience. And I do think that this continuing the EWN journey gets at that. It will be a journey for all of us through season 7. And you and I will continue to bring in wonderful guests that offer really deep insight, deep connections with nature. And we'll talk about these different lessons learned, issues and challenges that we face, and then what brings us all together, what connects us all, so that we take this journey in a way that will resonate with all of us.
I think that makes a lot of sense. As you mentioned, Todd Bridges, who is the former lead of the Engineering with Nature program, and you and I started this podcast journey with our brilliant producer, Dave Trafford, as a little science experiment.
That's right.
In 2020. And here we are, kicking off season 7. So the journey continues, but I think we want it to be new and fresh. We're going to try some different things. We're going to try some different formats. And I wanted, without giving away the shop, let's talk about some of the topics that we plan to cover. Our listeners know that, Jeff, you like the shows that have very high geek appeal. So we have some episodes we're working on to, satisfy your inner geek. One of the ones that we're working on is we want to update our listeners on the progress on 3D printing of nature-based solutions. We're going to have Burton Sudell and Alan Kennedy and others join us following a workshop in February to talk about some of the groundbreaking science that's being done with a group of brilliant scientists and out-of-the-box thinkers to actually use a dredged material to create 3D printed materials. It's so exciting.
Yes, Sarah. And I love how we always come back to things that channel my inner geek. I guess I am multidimensional in that respect, that I do really find science and technology absolutely fascinating. And to be able to talk to those pioneers and those real smart people that are leading practice and really developing new R&D technologies, that really does get me excited. And I know it gets a lot of our listeners excited too. I think that this is going to be just revolutionary. To be able to take and engineer corals, different reef complexes, other types of features that can be there working in tandem with natural features, using that as a means to create additional resilience. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful, and we're going to get to hear about that firsthand.
It's totally cool. And we also have interesting shows coming together on policies. There's a lot of progress that's being made on policies related to nature-based solutions. There's also some really interesting work being done on building relationships with colleagues in Asia who are exploring nature-based solutions and its importance in building coastal resilience. So we'll be doing episodes on those kinds of topics as well.
Yes, Sarah, absolutely. We will have an opportunity to talk more about what's happening in Southeast Asia. So much interest now on the part of designing and constructing nature-based solutions. So we will spend a little bit of time sharing with our listeners all of those different activities. But then, as you mentioned, policy too is incredibly important. And so I know that we will be having an event. The Network for Engineering with Nature is going to be holding an event at the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine in early February. And so there's going to be some outcomes from that event that we will also want to share with our listeners. So we'll look to have some of those individuals on as guests. And this all links up with what I think is going to be really, really exciting, which is the launch of EWN Atlas Volume 3. So this is something that we've had in the works now for the better part of a year. And I know that we've got a lot of people out there that are real fans of the Atlas series. And so it's going to be absolutely delightful to be able to get Atlas Volume 3 out there for the public.
We want to make sure that we feature some of the international contributors who've given us various stories, case examples in Atlas 3. It's really an important thing, and it really is. It really sets the precedent for innovation that is being done in nature-based solutions. So we'll make sure that we do an interesting show on that one as well.
That's right.
We've also got other guests that we're lining up. We've got leaders from really interesting not-for-profit organizations, agency partners, Engineering Nature District Proving Grounds, people that are making a really significant contribution to advancing nature-based solutions and engineering with nature. And maybe we've got a few surprises up our sleeve too. I don't think we can say too much at this point, but all we can say is stay tuned.
Oh, that's right. That's right, Sarah. And so you and I, we work pretty hard to bring really exciting guests to the podcast. And this year, this season is no exception. We're looking to have some really wonderful people on and want to sort of keep that as something of a surprise.
We set a high bar for ourselves, Jeff.
Always, right? We got to continue the journey after all. So that's what we're doing. Yeah. But if we can for just a minute, I'd like to maybe talk about a special guest that we have for episode 1.
Okay. Yeah. We're really excited about our first show. It was something that we wanted to do for some time. So Jeff, you talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, Sarah. So, we always do try to bring a variety of different topics to our podcast, and we really want to continue to do that. And we had a chance to sit down with Ricardo Aguirre, who is a practicing engineer, doing a lot of work with engineering with nature type of approaches on the ground in Arizona. And so not only is he an engineer, he's a rancher, he serves as a consultant, and he's also an educator. And really, what I thought coming out of that conversation was just an all-around expert and practitioner of what we call regenerative land management. And Ricardo shares his story with us, and it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I learned so much during this conversation. And he talks a lot about what goes into, say, traditional land management and how that has been a challenge with respect to climate change and thinking about how traditional sort of land management practices have really impacted the landscape and soils. And so he thinks about things differently, from the standpoint of holistic water harvesting and land management practices. So I would encourage everybody, really just get ready. Episode 1 is just so interesting, a fabulous conversation, and I know our listeners will enjoy it.
I agree. It's a really great episode, and it's a really thought-provoking show to kick off season 7. So make sure you tune in. Jeff, we've got so many great guests, and we've got fascinating topics. Our new season is lining up, and we've set the bar high. So here we go.
That's right, Sarah. I am so looking forward to season 7, and I want to say, and I have enjoyed every one of these seasons. I mean, they're just fantastic. The people are fantastic. You and I get to meet and talk with so many fabulous people. And I got to say, I think this one, and I probably say this every time, but I think this one's going to be our best one yet. And I do hope that our listeners will tune in and enjoy these conversations and have a chance to meet our really interesting guest.
Well, there you go. A personal invitation from Jeff King. Please join us when season 7 kicks off with episode 1 on January 24th. We're looking forward to it.
You've been listening to the EWN Podcast, developed by Sarah Thorne and Jeff King, National Lead, Engineering with Nature Initiative, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, for more information, you can visit our website, engineeringwithnature.org. The EWN Podcast is produced by Eye Contact Productions for the Engineering with Nature program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm Dave Trafford.